Imagine a world without prejudice, bullying, or fear. Imagine a world where our individuality is respected by all our peers. Inclusion and equity are more than words or just a ploy. They are workplaces rich with diversity, creating worlds we all enjoy. Imagine a better world where we all can live free and play, where the spirit of teamwork and solidarity give hope and light the way. Good business isn't just profits or pushing for sales. Good business must strive to be just as it scales. Good business is planting a seed and a visionary trail to foster an environment where diverse abilities prevail. Let's build that new world in solidarity. Diversity rocks innovation. Let's build solutions for equality to bring hope and transformation. Let's honor co-creation, honor individuality, with a vision for togetherness beyond screens and virtual reality. All it takes is a little to change the world a lot. Money comes and goes, but legacy isn't forgotten.
Welcome to Diversity Rocks Innovation, Volume 14. My name is Jackie Steele. I'm a Canadian political scientist living and teaching in Japan, and also the CEO of Enjoy Diversity and Innovation. Enjoy is a Japan-based, global-facing business working in English and Japanese, and sometimes in French. And we support leaders and corporations in building out diversity-positive workplaces and corporate cultures. We know that diversity rocks innovation. We know that diversity rocks innovation under certain conditions. Systemic inequality undermines innovation, and it undermines diversity. So we're interested really in building out inclusive innovation. Innovation that really amplifies and supports equity, equality, and that powers our people systems for personal and collective good and for the long game. We're talking legacy. So this live stream shines a spotlight on the diversity of Enjoy thought partners in our network. These are wonderfully dynamic, thought leading and pioneering individuals who really have shown up for this vision of how to build out a diversity positive environment in Japan. And they support women's leadership, men's leadership, and they understand that diversity is everywhere. So each week I invite one of my Enjoy thought partners to thought partner out loud with me organically. It's a collegial exchange of expertise, of worldviews, of talking about who we are and what our internal diversities are and why that can move the dial for innovation. So we throw away the business cards in terms of senpai kohai dynamics or, hierarchies based on age or gender or race or other facets that really slow us down in society and only build up bridges that block us or walls that keep us apart. So today we're going to thought partner out loud, and I am so excited to welcome on today's show a wonderful thought partner and a business mentor to me, Bryan Sherman. Bryan, welcome to Diversity Rocks Innovation Volume 14. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you very much, Jackie. Thank you for that introduction. よろしくお願いします。
よろしくお願いいたします。
よろしくお願いします。
So, Bryan, you've sort of been such a fabulous behind the scenes person supporting my fledgling journey into being an entrepreneur over the last 2 years, and you've helped me figure out a lot of things, and I'm grateful for that. You're 10 years ahead of me on this journey, and I want you to share about that journey, but before we get to that, I kind of really want to know, and I want our listeners to get the benefit of doing a little bit of a deep dive first into what makes Bryan tick, and what are the sort of pivotal experiences and diversities and values that you've built yourself around and your unique individuality. So can we maybe step back and go a little bit back in time first and think about where you're from?
Yep. Okay. Well, it all begins in a small, on an island in New York City. Actually, I was born in Brooklyn, but I was raised on an island, Staten Island. But I think probably my my sense of who I am today, I mean, I can really come back to an experience I had at age 13. I mean, at age 13, I'm still talking about that now that I'm not yet 50, but, getting closer to that. So, but so many years ago, that first experience of coming to Japan, which was my first experience to leave my native land, and to come and a student exchange all the way across the world. And I think what really struck me so much at that time was, while I appreciated the cultural differences, I appreciated Tokyo for what Tokyo is and how it clearly is superficially very different than New York, where I came from. I was so struck by the interconnectedness that I felt with people. So it was 10 Americans, 10 Japanese, and we were young, 13, 14 years old. And we laughed, we cried, we had fun, we're pubescent, so whatever goes along with all that. And I just thought, here it is, I'm in a country that's supposed to be so different, but I didn't feel that it was so different. Actually, I felt more of a commonality and a familiarity. That's a difficult word to say. With being in Japan, which led me to, I remember when we're all getting on the bus and saying goodbye and everybody else is crying. I wasn't crying. I wasn't crying because I knew I'd be back. So for me, it wasn't goodbye. It was just see you later. And I did. And I came back. When I was in high school, I spent a month. I was an American representative to a summer camp, which recently has somewhat gone defunct, but that was a camp, an international camp called Pacific Rim International Camp in Tokyo and Nagano, related to a camp that I had gone to during my freshman and sophomore year summers of high school in New York City, New York State in Rhinebeck, called Camp Rising Sun, which also was a very global camp. My campmates were from all around the world. I had a very close friend from Texas who, for the first time, met a Jewish person, in my family. My second year, I was very close with a guy from Nicaragua who was 13 or 14 when he was drafted into the Sandinistan army to fight against, I think it was the Contras, if I'm getting that correct, which was supported by the U.S. government. So there it is. My campmate is somebody that just a few months previously, my own government was probably supporting, the fight against. So, meeting people from all around the world, even before I got into college, definitely shaped my worldview of thinking, I do have identity. I have identity in who I am and where I come from, but I didn't necessarily think that I needed to stick with that same group.
Right.
And so here it is. So many years later, I'm happily living in Tokyo and enjoying this kind of international global experience, which I get every day by being right here in Tokyo. So.
What a fascinating opportunity, and at such a very, frankly, young age that you would be going all the way to Japan at age 13. Yeah. Not only as a parent, that kind of makes me go, oh, my daughter's 10, and that's, wow, 3 years out. Wow. But also, this camp you mentioned, the Rising Sun, was it Japan?
Actually,
was it created from Japan?
No, it wasn't. It had
in
nothing to do with Japan. It just happened to be, called Camp Rising Sun. It was started in the 1930s by a philanthropist named Freddie Jonas, who started the camp. And originally, it was a camp for New York City boys. So think about, New York City boys, summertime, get out of New York City. Everybody goes upstate. Upstate is what we call it, upstate New York. And in the first year or two, the international campers came from Western Europe. And over the years, the camp was still predominantly made up of New York City young adults. But ultimately, there were representations from people from all around the world. A few years later, there was an Israeli camper in my year a few years later, they had the Israeli camper and a Palestinian camper, together at camp. Two people that probably wouldn't have gotten together, within their own, natural, home environments, and they were able to sort of spend a summer together there. But I had campmates from all around the world, and just that experience of living with people from all around the world opened me up, and ultimately I kind of walk away with less of a sense of the differences. The differences are all on individual level, of course. I mean, there are, but you focus more on, okay, well, where are we all the same? And I find that interconnectedness is something that absolutely affects the values and the choices I made in my life since then. So I
can imagine, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think what a beautiful first also experience for so many young men into the sheer diversity of men and the sheer diversity of masculinities that are existing on the planet around the world, so that you don't also maybe box yourself in as what does it mean to be a man, or a real man do this? And we have some fairly narrow cultural tropes in North America or in Europe or in different countries that box men in. And but you connected with all different types of men and young men.
Definitely. I mean, and we had different activities. I mean, we had the activities from arts and crafts to hiking and canoeing. Now, in 1989, there was also the girls' camp was founded. So it actually was a camp for boys from the 1930s to 1989. And then the girls' camp comes, and the girls' campus was a distance from the boys' campus. But you can imagine on days that we all got together, people are taking, the boys are taking showers for the first time all week, and so there was definitely that dynamic to the, male-female dynamic there. But to your point, understanding kind of the different ways that we can all be, I mean, it's, of course, there's the jock types and the very athletic types, and then the more creative types, and, seeing that at a young age too, and people really come from all around the world, I was able to say, from a young age, that's not, I could look at somebody and say, not just Japanese people, who, I could say, well, that's Keijido, or that's Takao, and I know who they are, and I know there are very differences of, differences in personality. So, looking well beyond kind of just that first level cultural layer, is something I was able to experience, up to college, and then in college, spending a year at the Shisha University, and then after college, 2 years on the JET program, back to New York for 10 years to develop my professional kind of discipline, and then back to Japan in 2007, where I've now been living kind of stably for the past, 14 years or so.
And I mean, I think to your point that you mentioned that you didn't just see a Japanese kid. I mean, you go to camp with these, or a Nigerian kid, right? You end up getting to know their individual, unique parts of their personality, of where they're from, of what they like, and then you have fun together. And I think, one of the reasons I picked the name Enjoy for the business is really to say, we want to enjoy the diversity that's out there, and we want to enjoy innovation, but we also want to enjoy each other's diversity so that we can see the individual and move beyond the stereotypes.
I
think you don't enjoy it until you really see the full individual and say, that person's fun, and I want to go to camp and do sports with them, or do fishing with them, or do canoeing, or arts or crafts or whatever it is. And you bond, right? You bond to the activities, so then you're no longer just a caricature of that country's culture.
Definitely. So being able to kind of experience that, understand that at a young age, changed the trajectory of my life. And I know, when I first had that opportunity to come to Japan at age 13, and I went home to my parents and I said, "Hey, Mom, Dad, we've got this program that I could go to Japan with. I'd like to apply." And the first answer was, "Oh, but that's so far away, son." And I gave it up for a little bit until one day I'm called into the principal's office to say, "Hey, we have this program. Why don't you reconsider?" and then went home, and my parents kind of put their hands up and say, okay. And yeah, and all these
But
years later.
you needed that extra nudge from also the principal, which is good, because I mean, we underestimate that it takes a village. We need positive influences towards,
Right.
Global minded culture and exchanging with other people who are different and taking risks taking a risk of going abroad and doing something new, right? We need support for those choices in our home life and, in our school life. I mean, Catherine last week talked about, the importance of her home life and having her choices supported by her home and her family and her brothers. And it's so pivotal, right? But also if you don't get it at home, then hopefully you get it at school and it nudges you in that right direction. So
definitely.
So many adults, I think, mentor children real time, right? You also have spoken about, your New Yorker upbringing and how sometimes there is birds of a feather flocking togetherness in a way that's maybe not so interesting and that you chose to move away from. Can you talk to me about that?
Well, I think probably two aspects of that. I still always tell the story. I think, the biggest culture shock of my life was not moving from the United States to Japan. I say it was moving from New York City to Western Massachusetts for college during freshman year. And I think anybody going to college for the first year, there's a bit of an adjustment. But it was the first time I came into recognition of kind of my New York identity, in that I had a New York accent. I think I still, in my freshman year, I still had a bit of a gold chain, which I was wearing. My hair was short then, more by choice rather than right now where I'm going bald, but a little spiky. So I get to college, and I had this kind of New York demeanor, and I just didn't really understand that I had this New York demeanor. So I think over freshman year, I was kind of a transition to kind of a different demeanor. So that's even maybe what I was thinking on the inside, and my exterior was going to become more into alignment. So that was one thing, just sort of recognizing that difference in myself. But I think the other point is maybe growing up where I did in New York City, in Staten Island. I grew up in a relatively kind of white, neighborhood, but among white people too, we were kind of either Italian, Irish, or Jewish, and I'm of Jewish descent, and so I had a bar mitzvah. I went to Hebrew school, and I did have some friends within kind of the Jewish circle as a result of that, but I never kind of accepted that because there's kind of a born into identity, that's the identity that I need to sort of take all my life, and that's the group of people I need to be with just by default. I wouldn't call it a rebellion, but I think counterbalancing that message of sticking together with your kind, if it's kind of a not the nicest term, versus seeking out people that are from different countries, different cultures, speak different languages. I definitely, through the experience I just explained, had more of a proclivity towards that. And and that's, and that pretty much has become a big part of my identity, even to today.
And I think it's interesting. I mean, particularly when I think we're based in Japan, and I think we'll talk about this later too in more depth, but there tends to be kind of a dichotomy around you're either sort of Japanese or you're foreigner, and often foreigner is really subliminally signaling whiteness often, right? White Americanness almost even. And yet it's interesting that, of course, in, white America, and even if we speak about, European descent, white Canada, in Montreal, you see that too. You see that there's a diversity of whiteness in the city in terms of how white communities don't identify as white. They identify as Italian Canadian,
right?
Greek Canadian, Jewish Canadian, Irish Canadian. And so in Montreal, you would have these very clear neighborhoods. And when I was at university, I lived in the sort of in-between zone of the Greek, Orthodox Greek, the Hasidic Jewish, and the Italian community, kind of in that sort of some overlapping areas. And you would see these distinct neighborhoods that I think
Mhm.
we maybe is sort of set in time in the 1970s, 80s, 90s. That was more the case, and then eventually more multiculturalism has really moved those neighborhoods to be fully diversified and to mix a little bit more, but there still are some set boundaries around that. But how does that, I mean, we often fail to problematize the idea that whiteness is a cultural identity, because it's not, right? I mean, it's your skin color, but as you suggest, back in the day, there were distinctions that to be a part of the Italian community was different from the Greek community or the Jewish community of New York. How did that play out in terms of schools, and was there bullying across those different groups in the school grounds, or you know, how did that play out?
I think my overall experience is kind of more on the neutral side, and I don't have so many, you know, memories of so much, but I do remember kind of, you know, we live on a block, you know, it's a block of houses, and yeah, I think growing up, there is kind of a recognition of, you know, which family is the Irish family, which is the Italian family, which is the Jewish family, you know, and then it comes Christmas time, and, you know, the houses that are celebrating Christmas have, you know, the lights up, and then the Jewish family house is the least colorful, you know, unless you have a menorah in the window. So that those kind of things, you know, become aware, you know, people are aware, or maybe occasionally, you know, you might say, oh, here's my friend, here's my Jewish friend, or here's my, you know, and somebody might introduce you that way, you know, if you're getting into, you know, a different group. But ultimately, I mean, I think I think I'll just sum it all up to say that default kind of identity, that kind of default sense of this is who you need to be with, this is how you need to live, is not something that from that young age I kind of accepted, which put me on a different trajectory and, you know, makes me feeling very comfortable living where I live now, which is Tokyo, Japan. You know, and I am very happy to say, when I take business trips, you know, I say, you know, people say, where are you from? And I could say, oh, I come from Japan. I came from Japan, come from Japan, yeah. But then, you know, originally I come from the United States, I come from New York.
There's always that extra question, but where are you really from? Because you can't actually be from Japan if you're, you know, visibly white. And there's that tension, right?
But now, you know, maybe to shift to slightly, but one thing I'm thinking is, you know, being a non-Japanese person here in Japan, by definition or by word, we are gaijin, we are soto no ningen, right?
Outsiders,
and Japan is very much about soto, uchi and soto, right?
So external and internal for those who don't speak Japanese amongst our listeners,
right? So, you know, and sometimes I think that there's sort of a lamenting among the foreign community that, you know, foreigners are not fully integrated into Japanese society. But I just don't see it that way, or I don't feel that way either. I feel, you know, we have a very nice position here in Japan, in that, you know, and sometimes in being an expat means sometimes we can be very fully integrated. You know, there have been more than enough times when I find myself to be the only non-Japanese person in a room, and it's a completely Japanese context. And you know, you try to blend in a little bit, but then at the same point, I never feel the need to be Japanese. You know, don't need to even want to aspire to being Japanese. I like the fact that I can be non-Japanese, but find a way to integrate with my Japanese colleagues and friends as myself, and that's the different value that we bring, right? So this kind of finding this balance in Japan, I think is a struggle for some, and it's a challenge for many, to be able to be accepting of the fact that you will always be a gaijin, a soto no hito to some extent, but you can find ways where you could be integrated. But then at the same point, you could take a step back and say, but you know what? I am not Japanese. So I'm not going to do that, or I'm not going to do it exactly like that, or I will take a different approach, and that's okay. You know, so I think being non-Japanese in Japan, for the most part, it's a good thing.
and I think, right, there's ways in which there's the maybe formal legal belonging of not having a passport citizenship, and the legal political rights that are associated with that. And that's one level of inevitably being external until dual nationality is an option for those of us who are permanent residents and would aspire to have those two loyalties be really true in our legal and political rights. And being able to vote and have a voice in those systems. Because it affects, all of what we do as business people. It affects our children going through the, the school system. But there's also, I guess, the element of how do we disaggregate or take apart, and this is, I think, a process for the Reiwa era to really struggle with, is how do we think about building a Reiwa era conception of Japanese-ness that is not tied to racial identity, that it could be you're a member of this country without that signaling racial content or even, I think there's always going to be a cultural content because I think there's a culturalness to this country that foreigners also take on, and when they immigrate, like all immigrants, they take on the cultural benefits of that host culture and that host country, and they make that a part of themselves in a positive way. And so we can have the cultural Japanese-ness and the linguistic Japanese-ness, but if we could disassociate it from the racial component, it opens up so much more room for, I think, Reiwa Japan to build their population base, because I think there's and the sense of who is uchi, like the sense symbolically of who is then allowed to really be seen as insider, regardless of skin tone or those attributes. And if we can separate that out, we really would shift, I think, and move the dial in terms of, there's different people from different ethnocultural, racial makeup who all aspire to being a part of the Japanese cultural, global, focused space and cosmopolitan society that is Japan, because it is vibrant and it thrives, and it thrives because of all that internal diversity. So Jackie, I think that's an exciting idea.
Let me question. I mean, yes, okay, maybe, you're right. From the political standpoint, I mean, I think if we wanted to get Japanese citizenship, there is a process we could follow as well, right? So politically speaking,
naturalizing, if you let go of your own nationality.
Getting the permanent resident card, being a permanent resident, for the most part is, as I see it, is kind of the best of both worlds. I mean, I get to maintain my US passport, but I also get the right to live here, with the one exception of there was that period of time a few months ago when, the COVID pandemic started. And I think it was the policy that if we as permanent resident people even were to leave Japan, we would not be able to get back into
Japan. That continues. That actually continues.
Really? Does it?
For certain nationalities, it's not clear cut. So not everyone has easy access of re-entering Japan if you're a permanent resident. So that's one issue. And I think the political voice being the other area.
But putting now aside the politics of what is nationality, right? By for what we're talking about now, about the need for, kind of an integration, and, we're talking about new diversities within Japan. I'm gonna venture to say, I think we're moving there. Japan is getting to that point. I mean, and it's getting to that point whenever anybody like you, me, are living in Japan and we make a life here. Because we are adapting. I mean, and as I said before, I made a comment, I don't need to be Japanese. I don't need to, but what I meant by that is I don't need to completely shed all of my experience and identity that I had before I came here, of course. But we absolutely have to adapt. Right? So I'm creating a training program right now. So I'm going to just speak from that. And it's a 3-step. It's called appreciation. It's a 3 steps of thriving in Japan. To thrive in Japan requires first appreciation of your context, which, is about appreciating the cultural elements. So, understanding uchi, soto, giri to on, the difference between using san sama, or kun, to refer to people, and understanding all these different, cultural relations.
Polite speak, the titles,
Exactly.
the obligation, and
so
insider,
that
outsider.
creates the context, though. So we have to first appreciate the context, and then we need to figure out how to adapt. And I think everybody that lives here needs to ask themselves those questions. Which elements of the Japanese context do I want to make my own? Do I appreciate enough that I will adapt to it and change in a certain way? Mm. And then at the same point, where do I maybe put my hand up politely and say, that's not for me. I draw the line at natto. Everybody always says natto's good for you. I say, I don't care. I don't need it. I don't like it. I always joked. I said, as soon as I start eating natto, that means I'm going to have to go to the embassy and turn in my U.S. passport. I don't want to do that, right?
And there are so many Japanese people who don't like natto, so we are in good company.
Exactly. But like even today on the TV, it's an interesting story is because of the COVID restrictions, restaurants are closed. There's a lot of rojo inshu. People are drinking on the streets and hanging out, and they showed how the Kamogawa in Kyoto is being dirtied and people are leaving their trash. And they're doing the same thing in Tokyo. And first I look at that and I think, wow, this is the level of reporting in Japan. But when you think about it, when you're out in public and if you have a PET bottle or you have your garbage, are you going to just flick it on the street and leave it on the street? No, right? So that's, an adaptation. I mean, I know for sure that until I find the right receptacle for my garbage, I will carry it. And if it means bringing it all the way home, I will do that. In other places, maybe you didn't worry about that. You just threw it where you could. But, part of being in Japan and being a good shakaijin, person of society, is recognizing that there are these kind of adaptations that you need to take. So, and I'm not sure if that's the best example, but, it's an example of just how clearly, ideas about the external world and your relationship to it and the rest of society sort of changes. And if you're going to be in Japan, you definitely need to adapt in certain ways.
I think that's a beautiful example of one of the things I appreciate so much about the sense of civic space in Japan, or public space as a shared space that no one person or one group can just take over because they're louder, or you can't colonize. Public spaces are not up for grabs for the loudest person to just dominate in. It is a shared space, and
or they shouldn't be. But when people are doing that, when people are leaving their trash around, or before COVID, it was summertime at the at the river or something, and they show how people have left all their barbecue garbage there, and that makes news, right? So it makes news because you're not supposed to do it. You're supposed to think about others.
Right? That's not the good life. The good life here is that you share your public space, and it's a shared space. And I love that. I think it's an important part of political philosophy that we've lost about civic sharing, of what is held in common.
Yeah.
Can I ask you about where and how you pivoted your global-minded or cosmopolitan view from a business perspective? Because I know you worked in New York for, I think it was New York for many, many years. And then you decided to go on an entrepreneurial journey. I mean, those are interesting pathways. Why did you come back to Japan for that journey?
Well, if I summarize my experience quickly, I have worked in different locations. I've worked in different companies, and I've had different roles, but I've been following the same theme throughout my career. So after I graduated from college in 1997. So I came to Japan. It was the JET program. And I realized, JET program was great for what it was. I did the first year I did the ALT, teaching in a school. Second year I was the CIR, the coordinator of international relations, working in a city hall office. And all of that was great, but I knew it wasn't leading to any kind of career per se, but it gave me a nice experience. So in my mid-20s, when I'm kind of having a little bit of angst about what I should do with life, I thought, well, I could move to Tokyo, or I just go back to my home country and kind of get my roots there. So I did go back to the United States, but I was able to pivot in a nice way there. I found a kind of a small entrepreneurial consulting company that was focused on the Japanese company market in primarily New York, but in the Eastern Seaboard area, and was able to write to the president at that time and say, here I am. I don't know anything about HR consulting, but I have some of this cultural background and this experience, and I'd love to do something Japan related. I'm not sure what it is. And so entered that company. And for a few years, I worked in New York City. And then I was able to go to California and start up some business in California. So I got my first kind of entrepreneurial taste when I was still, it was kind of, working within that company and still focusing on Japanese companies. So I was developing my professionalism as an HR kind of manager consultant, learning through the eyes of, particularly the Japanese expatriates who were sent from Japan to manage in the United States. So after having done that for a few years and having a little bit of feeling maybe imposter syndrome in that I'm teaching about HR and I'm saying this is what you should do based upon what I've learned from my boss, who is the head consultant, I realized, wait, I need the internal experience. So I left the consulting world to go work inside a customer organization where the president, I was offered a job. And so then I got to understand the inside of the company. And I did that. So I got that facet and did that.
Insider, outsider.
Yep, inside, outside, right. And then 2007, my wife and I, for personal reasons, were deciding this could be a good time to return to Japan. I did my job search and was able to find a position with Fast Retailing, the parent company of Uniqlo. I had first did interviews from New York. I had a video interview, came to Tokyo for the final interview with, the HR Yakuin on one day, and then the final interview was the next day with Yanai-san, who is the president of Fast Retailing and the richest man in Japan. And
not intimidating.
Not so intimidating, but I made sure the previous day when I spoke with the HR Yakuin, I understood that if they were bringing me to that final interview with Yanai-san, it was their reputation as well, right? They wouldn't put me in front of him if they didn't think I was good enough. So I made sure that I got some sense of how to approach Yanai-san on that day, what to say, what not to say. So I got that, and a few minutes after that interview, I was given the offer of employment. So was able to move back to Japan and be what I think I can say I was the first non-Japanese person to work in the group HR department of Fast Retailing. I wasn't the first gaijin at all to work in Fast Retailing, but I was the first in HR. Did that for a few years, was able to understand the headquarter operations, and having headquarter operations, overseas subsidiary operation experience, HR experience throughout. In 2010, I said, now I'm going to try my hand at being an entrepreneur myself, and founded Gramercy Engagement Group, which I've been running for the past 11 years.
What was the challenge you were seeking in shifting to this new business of your own?
I definitely, when I had worked initially in the consulting company in New York City and then went to California to start business there, I definitely had that flair for trying to start my own thing. I just liked the challenge of starting from a zero base. When you start something from nothing and you can build it to something, there's satisfaction in that. I think that was probably the first impetus for it. And then from there, timing was right in that I think working in Fast Retailing and Uniqlo's expansion overseas meant that the headquarter operations needed to transform itself from being that very domestic, only focused, corporate headquarters to a corporate headquarters that's really managing a worldwide business. Even to this day, there are many Japanese companies that are still struggling to pivot in that way.
Yes.
But what I was experiencing at fast retailing became kind of, those insights I got there were very much applicable to a lot of companies generally. So I was able to incorporate some of that insight into my initial consulting, which then also, as I'm doing that, and I realized companies are requiring, training and facilitation, I was able to expand kind of my own professional base of what I do to say I'm a consultant, trainer, facilitator. And now more recently, I'm getting more into executive coaching, and I can say I'm an executive coach as well.
What is the pivot that you mentioned and that is involved in truly, instead of having a Japanese company with overseas acquisitions, but really stays as a Japanese company?
Yep.
Compared to a Japan-based, geolocation Japan-based company that is a global company. And in terms of mindset, and they like tamatama Nihon ni iru, like we happen to be based geolocation in Japan, but it's a global company. What is that pivot entail?
I want to just sort of, I think you're describing kind of a spectrum. You're describing the spectrum of being a very Japanese company that just has some overseas business to being a mukokuseki, having almost no nationality. I'd like to say, I think, even with a few exceptions, any company still maintains its corporate identity in its original country of establishment.
Yeah.
But so a Japanese company should still be an unapologetic Japanese company. In that, for that point, one thing that I've learned from working with a lot of Japanese companies and some of the projects I do is the Kigyo Rinen Shinto, which is the Kigyo Rinen is the corporate philosophy, and Shinto is kind of the dissemination of that philosophy to the overseas subsidiaries. And many Japanese companies have pride in their history, of course. They have pride in their values. And when they're able to express those values equally to their overseas subsidiaries, the people in the overseas subsidiaries, 99% of the time, have shown appreciation for that. Oh, wow, this is an idea that came from Japan. This is how the company was established. And they develop more of a sense of identity with a recognition that it is a Japanese company and it has its origin here. So in that way, I'm saying, yes, still be a Japanese company. But now maybe to get to your question, right? The challenge for all globally operating Japanese companies right now is to, I'll say, recognize the gray in the world. There's still too much black and white in terms of operations. So what do I mean by that? So many times still, when I can start talking to a company and, I work a lot with the corporate functions, right? So from a corporate function, we'll even say HR, we'll take the HR corporate function. The HR department, let's say for argument's sake, could have 100 people in it. I'd say 75% or more are all focused on what's happening in Japan only. Their entire area of work is the domestic market. If you have an HR department, if there's anybody who's focusing on the overseas business, the overseas subsidiaries, there'll be normally a sub-team of the HR department. And then the work that they do is primarily expatriate handling, selecting people, sending them overseas, doing pre-departure training, and manage. So they're dealing with the overseas business, but they're dealing with the expatriates. A very small percentage might be thinking about who the people working overseas are in the subsidiaries and how to develop and retain those best talent. This is not good. It has to flip. So this has been my message to a lot of the companies I've been working with for all these years, is that yes, you do have a domestic HR function, which probably needs to, it'll always stay like payroll. Payroll will never be globalized, and it shouldn't be, and it can't be, because payment of salary is done on a very local basis. And of course, you might have union issues or, different. So you definitely have a domestic HR, but the global headquarters should be that global headquarters. It should be that what's happening in Japan is just one small sliver of the totality of what the function is looking at. And there should be much more integration. When you're looking at your top leaders should be a pool of people that are coming from the headquarters as well as from overseas subsidiaries. Overseas subsidiary people should be given the opportunity to take positions in maybe in the headquarters in Japan, so bring the overseas people to Japan, or in other subsidiaries, they become third party, third country nationals. That dynamic global talent management is being done in some companies for sure, but not nearly enough companies if you look at their global footprint. So that's my sense of where the Japanese company needs to change in terms of its operations and in terms of recognizing that seishain, tadashi shain, seishain basically means tadashi shain, right?
Like a correct full-time employee.
And, in most of the, delineation still, seishain is a group of people that have been hired in Japan, probably as shinsotsu, new graduates.
Permanent.
And the people that are working overseas are no more than just NS or locally hired national staff. And most of the companies that I when I start working with them, their assumption is, well, they're NS, so they don't want to do anything more than, maybe the highest they would get is to be a top manager in the subsidiary if they no longer send expatriates from Japan. So there might be some localization. But what happens is the people that are really the global talent will realize, wait, the company's not giving me those opportunities. They're not even recognizing me. Sayonara.
There's nowhere to go up the food chain all the way to headquarters because of the way it's constructed internally.
And so when, so really what we're talking about here is kind of a global talent management and development, structure where the headquarter people clearly need to focus on Japan. But at the same time they're focusing on Japan, they also need to be focusing on what's happening around the world in terms of talent management and governance, compliance.
Of course.
But still, many of the companies are saying, but our purview is right here in Japan because this is what we do.
Well, and this is where you're talking my language, and I feel like we're on the same page because, of course, the diversity, equity, inclusion, innovation conversation is all about diverse talent acquisition, retention, and then mobilization to hopefully all levels of the pipeline. And we do see high levels of attrition of women and of global talent because there is no room to go all the way up and to be seen and accepted as an insider who will be a leader, the next generation leader of the company. And so your only choice is to step off and to go to a different company, right? And that institutional knowledge and organizational knowledge then is just constantly bleeding out of these companies who really would want to retain that talent and mobilize it. But it does require a shift. And I'll ask you if I'm understanding your point. You mentioned that it's sort of, HR function and global HR is a subset within that. Whereas I feel like you're saying it should be global HR and Japanese HR is here, and there's each acquisition abroad or each foreign entity has a subset for that piece, but it's all got a global mindset and broader big picture vision around how to use all that talent across the whole ecosystem.
It is exactly as you're saying. I mean, it's basically if you're looking at your headquarter operation, whether and if it's a Japanese company, it's in Japan. Now, a few years ago, some companies were beginning to say, oh, but maybe to be globally competitive, we need to shift our headquarters overseas. And I've actually seen with some companies, they create this really strange power politic, because they take some functions and they say, well, this function will be headquartered in the United States, or this function is headquartered in Singapore, but they still have their major executives still residing in Tokyo. So that doesn't work. It doesn't work out nicely. So I believe that Japanese companies can and should retain their corporate headquarters in Japan, and again, be unapologetically a Japanese company. But yeah, the corporate headquarter functions, marketing, sales, R&D, HR, finance, those are global corporate functions. And in so doing, and to create that, it's easy to create on paper, but to create it in reality. And this is what I find to be so fascinating, is when I can look at similar companies in the same industry, or back up for a moment. We could say, well, but Bryan, every industry has a different business model. Every industry has a different approach. So, it's going to depend upon the industry, except it doesn't, because I've seen companies within the same industry, and I can see how they take a radically different approach. And so what does it come down to? It comes down to who's in charge, and what that person's experience was. What did they do when they were 13 years old? What did they do when they were 16? What did they do in college? Did they live overseas? Did they not? Have they had experiences to sort of open themselves up, or have they only focused their entire career on the Japanese market? In which case, once they become bucho or honbucho or yakuin, right? All of the high levels.
Or division, right, director.
Yeah. Unless they've had some kind of experience that opens them up, they'll still see things in terms of that binary dichotomy of kokanai versus kaigai, the Japan domestic versus everything overseas. But the reality is there's a gray. The gray is we need to sort of constantly be intertwining. You need to be able to pick up the phone and answer in Japanese, and hang up the phone and then get on a Zoom with your global colleagues and speak in English. And you need that flexibility to pivot. And right now, that's still the area of challenge for many.
I mean, I'm hearing two things that I think is so exciting in terms of moving beyond, like you say, the black and white dichotomy, that things that are domestic, and therefore everything global is outside Japan, as if globalness lives outside Japan, when globalness needs to also, and does, frankly, live in Japan. And you've shared to me about this point, but how do we then build and have recognition and appreciation for the globalness within Japan? And does it really also depend on high functioning bilingual leadership? What extent do you think that is a...
Yes and no. So here's something I ask this question when I do training a lot, or I start with this and I say, what is the meaning of global? Okay. And for the most part, what people, and in the word global in its regular parlance, wherever I think we are, normally, well, in Japan, global is normally people will respond, oh, that's overseas. That's out there. Because we are domestic, we are here in Japan. And I say, hold on, really? What's the meaning of global? Okay, overseas. Well, no, what's a globe? Globe. You can picture this. Chikyu, the Earth. Where's Japan? Is Japan located on the moon, on Mars? No, and Japan's right here. Exactly. And where's America? And where's Europe? Okay, we're all here. Now, our position on the globe is different, longitude, latitude, but is there any specific place on the globe that is more global than any place else? No. So logically, global is not out there. Global is here, there, everywhere. Global is us. It's where we live. So, and I say that sometimes in jest, but I think I use it to make a point. Global does not mean getting on a plane and leaving Japan. For you and me, we're having a beautifully global experience every day that we're here, because we're living on the globe and we're living in a different place. So, we're having interactions with people So the point is this: global is not out there. Global really is a mindset too. And so I think what that mindset is, as I'm defining it in also some of the trainings I provide, is I've come up with 9 different traits, right? But one of them is a sense of interconnectedness. So if we're looking uchi and soto, uchi, what is the biggest uchi? The biggest in group is humanity, right? So and of course, I mean, there are Japanese people that get this. I mean, this is but there are many times people that, because they've lived in constructs where we need to sort of organize things, and it's very easy to sort of say in and out, domestic versus global. But no, so we're all part of that same humanity, that interconnectedness. And if you're doing a global business, you absolutely have to have that sense, because there's no part of your business that is more important than the other as soon as you hang your corporate banner somewhere, especially from a governance point of view nowadays, right? What happens in your business in Africa can have a major impact on your brand back in the home country, or wherever it is, right? So it's a mindset. Now,
and I feel like, correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like the word global is used as a shorthand to really mean you have a cosmopolitan viewpoint that goes beyond your own cultural and linguistic rootedness and upbringing, to think about countries around the world and integrate multiple cultures and multicultural interculturalism and potentially multilingualism. But at a minimum, even if you're not multilingual, you're intercultural in the sense of seeing that the world doesn't just revolve around your own cultural identity and national rooted situatedness. And that cosmopolitan identity we talk about in political science and political philosophy as the root of, high mobility cultures, and particularly, advanced, professional classes that have high cosmopolitan value in terms of mobility around the world for work. But it's not everybody who's experiencing that yet, of course. It is really tied to education levels often too.
I mean, it's education, it's the experience. I mean, from that standpoint too, there clearly are a lot of places in America that are not global because they only see what's there in front of them in America, And so, I mean, so I think every country probably has people that have that cosmopolitan way of thinking, that range. Right. And, does everybody in Japan need to have that? Most likely not. But if you're working in a multinational company and you're working in the corporate headquarters, right? And here's probably my final point too. Clearly what we run into is, we run into the language barrier. And so what I try to tell the people that I work with is to get them over this language hurdle is they need to reshape their relationship with English, because English is this global language. And I say, you use a computer, right? How'd you learn to compute? Why do you use a computer? Well, it's a tool. Okay. And did you have classes in it? No, I kind of taught myself, because I realized it was an important tool. Well, isn't English just a tool as well? But you see, English for Japanese people to this point has been a test, or it's been something that's been held over them. And it's never been what you use as a tool of communication to increase your interconnectedness. But that's what I try to tell people. That's what it is. You need to reestablish a relationship with English where it's not held over you. It's an implement. It's a tool that you use in order to make connections with people. And
hopefully it's a tool that brings ultimate joy through those connections.
Yeah. Oh, and
right.
That's the point, right? As soon as you create connections and you can find those similarities, right? So, and that's, so that's what's necessary now in Japan. So, and it's sometimes it's about dealing with the foreigners who are, of course, at the overseas subsidiary. Now, more and more, it's about dealing with the people that are right here in front of you, working side by side, finding your interconnectedness, finding
commonality,
the joy of working together, your commonalities. As foreigners, we are doing the same, and we're adapting so that ultimately what the Japanese company needs for its success in this era is absolutely strong Japanese leaders, but also strong Japanese leaders walking walking hand in hand. Let's get that image, or walking together, shoulder to shoulder, side by side, whatever it is, with non-Japanese leaders and non-Japanese people that appreciate the Japanese context and can go together. So this is what I'm trying to do in my work. I'm just trying to create the sense that the Japanese company should again be unapologetically Japanese, but at the same point needs to be integrative, and inclusive of those people that are not Japanese, so that the Japanese strengths can be enhanced, and in some areas where they don't have that perspective or that skill, it can be made up for by the non-Japanese person. If the Japanese company can reestablish itself with this mindset, Japanese companies have a lot to give to the world. And
so much.
I'm extremely happy to sort of be doing my work from a Japan base.
Well, that's a fabulous takeaway, Bryan, and fabulously inspiring. And certainly I know that Gramercy Engagement Group and Enjoy, we're going to have lots of fun together doing things in this space.
We enjoy.
And it's going to be fun and disruptive and, positive in terms of, like you say, giving space to that role for Japan to shine through global Japaneseness, if you will. And I think that's going to be the Reiwa era's next contribution, I think, to the globe. So thank you for a fabulous conversation and learning. Your book is so exciting.
Can I just plug that too?
Yeah, of course. So, the author. I mean,
so I think everything I'm talking about is somehow included in this book, which I published last year with Waseda Daigaku Professor Shiraki. We wrote Ego de Jinji, which is Nichie Taigaku ni yoru Jisen Teki Jinji, which is a completely Japanese-English bilingual book about pretty much my experiences in HR.
Highly recommend it to everyone. And I think, we're going to be probably circling back and coming back to Bryan several times for things in the future. So we will hear from you again.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for these really important insights on how we build out space for diversities and for commonalities, because that's what we hold together, right? And this is going to move the dial. I'll just give a quick shout out because we are slightly over time, but I want to give a quick shout out to the Enjoy team for all their help really creating the live stream, all of the promotional materials, and all of these beautifully diverse people in my team who really help and support that this becomes a possibility for us to share with all the Enjoy Thought partners in our network. So I'm going to encourage you to take a moment and have a little pause, recenter yourself before your afternoon work. Enjoy a very gorgeous song by leading Canadian singer-songwriter Andrea Menard. And you can check out in the end roll credits all of the beautiful individuals who are showing up for the Enjoy Diversity and Innovation team here in Japan and also abroad. So on that note, thank you so much, Bryan.
Thank you, Jackie. Thank you very much.
And we're off to the races once I can get the shared screen going. This is my one little piece where I need to smooth this piece out, but we're never perfect, right? And so it's always a journey.
Doesn't matter. Just enjoy the journey.
We will get there. And thanks, everyone.
Yep. Thank you.
Enjoy the song.
My favorite chair, I sit and watch the seasons turn as white as my hair. So many wonder and doubt, but I've softened at the edges, my laugh line spread out. The voices of my youth still sing with the river so clear. The river and I are everlasting, both headed elsewhere, but we'll always be